For centuries, vultures have been unfairly cursed with the worst PR campaign in the animal kingdom. If there was an Academy Award for most misunderstood creature, these birds would win every year, probably without even attending the ceremony, because let's be honest, they'd be too busy digging into a 3-day-old zebra carcass somewhere in the savannah. Their reputation has been soaked in death, wrapped in folklore, and handed down through generations as omens of doom. They are the grim reapers of the skies, floating over war zones, desert wastelands, and movie scenes where the main character is crawling through the sand, gasping for water, while vultures circle above as if taking bets on when he'll drop. But are these birds truly harbingers of death, or have we just been a little too dramatic? Maybe, just maybe, the vulture isn't a flying ghoul, but nature's misunderstood janitor, tirelessly working overtime to clean up the mess that no other animal wants to touch. The moment you see a vulture, something in your brain whispers, "Oh no, something is definitely dead nearby." This isn't a coincidence. Ancient civilizations looked up at the sky, saw vultures hanging around decaying bodies, and came to the most obvious conclusion: these birds must be in league with the afterlife. They were not entirely wrong. Vultures and death go together like peanut butter and jelly, but not because the birds cause it. They simply show up at the right time and get blamed for the crime. In ancient Egypt, vultures were both feared and revered. The goddess Nekhbet, the protector of pharaohs and the patron of Upper Egypt, was often depicted as a vulture. Egyptians believed these birds could detect impending death before it happened. And honestly, with their insane eyesight, 8 times better than humans, it's likely they just spotted some poor soul looking particularly weak and thought, "Ah yes, lunch is scheduled soon." Despite their spooky connection to death, they were also associated with motherhood and protection, because, believe it or not, vultures are actually great parents. Nothing screams warm family bonding time like regurgitating rotten meat directly into your chick's mouth. Fast forward to medieval Europe, and vultures took a turn for the worse in the reputation department. They became the flying undertakers of battlefields, swooping in to clean up fallen warriors after bloody wars. Imagine knights in shining armor, locked in combat, clashing swords in the heat of battle, only for a group of vultures to casually land nearby like sports fans, waiting for the game to end so they can collect leftover popcorn from the stands. Not a great look for the bird. And then came Hollywood, which made vultures the official background dancers of disaster. Stuck in a desert with no water? Vultures. Walking through a cursed land? Vultures. Investigating a creepy abandoned town? Yep, a vulture is perched somewhere, looking down with a dead-eyed stare, waiting for you to trip over your shoelaces and become its next meal, which is of course not how it works, but try explaining that to a horror movie director. Now, let's take a moment to clear their name. Vultures do not kill. They do not chase you down alleys. They do not whisper your darkest secrets into the night. What they do is keep the planet from turning into a smelly, disease-ridden mess. These birds are nature's garbage disposal system, and their stomachs are stronger than any biohazard lab on Earth. They can consume meat so rotten it would make a rat vomit, yet they survive without a scratch. Their stomach acid is so corrosive it kills anthrax, botulism, and even rabies. Without vultures, the world would be drowning in plague-ridden carcasses faster than you can say global health crisis. So, next time you see one, maybe thank it instead of fearing it. That guy is working harder than your office janitor after a company holiday party. But wait, vultures aren't the only birds with a dark reputation. Enter the raven, the shadowy trickster of the skies, and arguably the vulture's edgier, more poetic cousin. If vultures are corporate cleanup workers, ravens are the weird goth kids of nature, hanging out at the scene of a crime just because it looks cool. Ravens have been linked to death for centuries, appearing in Norse mythology as Odin's messengers, showing up in Edgar Allan Poe's poetry to dramatically say, "nevermore," and in many cultures being seen as the souls of the dead themselves. Unlike vultures, they don't need death to survive, but they sure seem to enjoy it. They follow vultures around like tiny, feathery paparazzi, waiting to steal scraps from their meals. They are smart too. Studies show that ravens are capable of problem-solving, memory recall, and even holding grudges. Yes, if you wrong a raven, it might actually remember your face and tell its friends. Imagine being blacklisted by a bird gang. Together, vultures and ravens form an unlikely but efficient team. The vulture finds the meal, starts the feast, and the raven, ever the opportunist, swoops in to snatch whatever it can. If the animal kingdom had a crime syndicate, vultures would be the heavy muscle, and ravens would be the clever con artists, sneaking in to grab what they need before anyone notices. Vultures may look terrifying, their bald heads making them seem like old men who know too much, but they are vital to our ecosystem. Without them, we'd be knee-deep in decaying flesh, and trust me, that is not a world you want to live in. Meanwhile, ravens, their feathered partners in crime, continue to dance between the world of the living and the dead, making sure the supernatural remains just mysterious enough for us to keep writing stories about them. So are vultures really harbingers of doom? No, they are the misunderstood janitors of the wild, working tirelessly to clean up after death, so we don't have to. And if we ever do reach the apocalypse, let's just say these birds are going to be very, very well fed. Nature has always had its fair share of janitors, those unsung heroes who clean up after the mess left by others. Some creatures are delicate about it, like earthworms gently recycling nutrients into the soil. Others, however, take a much more aggressive approach, storming into the scene of death like a crime scene cleanup crew armed with industrial-grade acid and a complete lack of table manners. Enter the vulture, the ultimate corpse disposal machine, a bird so uniquely suited to the job that if there were a world's toughest stomach competition, it would win without breaking a sweat or a feather. Vultures don't just eat the dead, they purify the earth. While other animals nibble around the edges of a carcass, worried about infections or diseases, the vulture plunges straight into the festering mess like a medieval executioner who missed lunch. Their stomach acid is so powerful that it can dissolve bacteria that would kill nearly any other creature, including rabies, botulism, and anthrax. Yes, actual anthrax. While humans need hazmat suits and entire government agencies to handle a biological hazard, vultures treat it as a delicious Tuesday afternoon snack. The secret lies in their gastric superpowers. A vulture's stomach is essentially a pit of destruction, operating at a pH level between 0 and 1, which is strong enough to dissolve bones, neutralize the deadliest pathogens, and probably erase the existence of a small universe if given the chance. If humans had such digestive systems, we'd never have to worry about food poisoning ever again. Unfortunately, we do not. And that is precisely why we should thank vultures for doing the job that would turn any other species into a bloated, disease-ridden disaster. But what happens when vultures are not around to do their job? Well, let's just say that things get ugly fast. In areas where vulture populations have plummeted, thanks to poisoning, habitat destruction, and the general human tendency to ruin everything they touch, the consequences have been horrific. Without these birds swooping in to sanitize the land, rotting corpses pile up, breeding grounds for bacteria flourish, and diseases spread like a medieval plague party. In India, for example, a drastic decline in vultures led to an explosion of feral dogs, which in turn caused a surge in rabies cases, because as it turns out, dogs are terrible at biohazard cleanup. And yet, vultures are not alone in the world of scavengers. Enter the hyena, a creature so uniquely positioned in nature's cleanup crew that it has mastered both hunting and recycling the dead. If vultures are the winged disposal experts, hyenas are the land-based wrecking crews, known for their bone-crushing abilities and a laugh that sounds like they just heard the world's darkest joke. These two creatures exist in a strange, competitive yet cooperative dance, like two rival cleaning companies showing up at the same job, each trying to outdo the other. At first glance, hyenas and vultures seem to be enemies. Both are drawn to the same thing, death. Both want to devour what remains, and both will not hesitate to steal from one another given the opportunity. When a lion or leopard makes a kill and leaves behind scraps, hyenas are often the first ground troops to storm in, snapping and cackling like unhinged hyena hooligans. Vultures watching from above take notes. The moment the hyenas have had their fill and wander off, down come the vultures, descending like a feathered apocalypse, ripping apart whatever is left with horrifying efficiency. But this rivalry is not as simple as it seems. While hyenas often bully vultures off a carcass, they also depend on them to spot food first. Vultures have an aerial advantage, capable of scanning miles of land in search of fresh kills, and hyenas have learned to watch them closely. When a group of vultures suddenly drops out of the sky, hyenas know that dinner has been served, and they follow in pursuit, like opportunistic party crashers who weren't invited but showed up anyway for the buffet. The relationship gets even more complicated when vultures try to cash in on hyena kills. While vultures rarely have the guts to challenge a full-grown hyena directly, they swarm in numbers, using what can only be described as aggressive teamwork to force hyenas away from their own meals. It's an amusing sight. Hyenas, known for their relentless persistence and bone-crushing jaws, occasionally find themselves overwhelmed by a chaotic tornado of feathers and beaks.
One moment they're feasting, the next they're dodging wing slaps and irritated squawks trying to hold on to their precious scraps.
Despite this ongoing battle of the scavengers, vultures and hyenas ultimately work together to keep the ecosystem clean. Without vultures, disease spreads faster, and without hyenas, the natural balance of predator and scavenger is thrown off. Together, they form an efficient waste management team, one specializing in aerial reconnaissance and bacterial extermination, the other in brute force cleanup and intimidation tactics. Yet, despite their ecological importance, both species suffer from some serious image problems. Hyenas have been unfairly branded as cowardly, thanks to their reputation as scavengers, even though they are expert hunters who take down live prey. Vultures, meanwhile, are viewed as harbingers of doom, even though they are literally the reason we don't live in a disease-infested wasteland. It's a tragic irony. Two of nature's most essential species, constantly misunderstood and villainized, while they continue to do their thankless work. In the end, the world needs these corpse-cleaning dynamos. Whether swooping from the skies or prowling through the savannah, vultures and hyenas are the frontline defense against nature's most unpleasant side effects. Without them, the delicate balance of life and death would tip into chaotic, disease-ridden madness, and we'd be left with a world where decay wins and disease reigns supreme. So the next time you see a vulture circling overhead or a hyena giggling in the distance, take a moment to appreciate their work. They may not be the most glamorous creatures, but in a world without them, we'd all be drowning in rotting carcasses, festering disease, and the unchecked chaos of nature gone wild. And frankly, no one wants to live in a world like that, except maybe cockroaches. But that's a nightmare for another day. The sky has always been the realm of hunters, a place where wings determine who rules and who gets left behind. If the land belongs to lions, wolves, and hyenas, the air is dominated by creatures that see far beyond what mere mortals can comprehend. It is here that vultures perform their most brilliant, strategic, and slightly morbid role, watching, waiting, and swooping in at just the right moment. They are not killers. They are not chasers. They are the ultimate aerial assassins of the scavenger world, silent executioners who never lift a claw in violence, yet claim nature's most bountiful meals with impeccable timing. But how does a creature that doesn't hunt end up on top of the food chain? How do these bald-headed, ragged-feathered, slightly hunched birds maintain such an intimidating presence in the skies? The answer lies in their supernatural ability to detect death before it even fully arrives, as if they're in constant conversation with the Grim Reaper, getting early notifications for every expired subscription to life. To understand vultures, you must first understand their freakishly powerful eyesight. If humans had vulture vision, we'd be able to see a coin lying on the ground from over 3 miles away, spot an ant crawling on a table from across a football field, and probably read messages over someone's shoulder from the next town over. It's so good that vultures don't even need to rely on their noses like other scavengers. Instead, they scan the horizon, detecting the slightest movement of a struggling, dying animal or, more conveniently, a fresh pile of free food left behind by nature's actual hunters. And here's where the twist comes in. Vultures don't just rely on their own eyes. They rely on each other's eyes. Imagine this. Somewhere in the African savannah, a single vulture catches a glimpse of a limping antelope that has clearly seen better days. Perhaps it got into a fight, lost a battle with a lion, or simply woke up on the wrong side of the food chain. The vulture, now buzzing with the excitement of a free meal, begins circling. This, in the scavenger world, is the equivalent of a flashing neon sign saying, "Fresh food coming soon." Within minutes, other vultures see the circling movement and start gathering, expanding the aerial network of eyes. More eyes mean a wider search grid, and suddenly, before the poor antelope even collapses, there's an entire horde of floating funeral guests waiting to RSVP to its demise. The process is as cruel as it is genius. A chain reaction of vultures, watching other vultures, watching dying creatures. The moment one spots something interesting, others drop their current activities, follow the movement, and before long, an entire fleet of scavengers is heading toward the same unfortunate soul. What makes this system so efficient is that each species of vulture has its own specialty. Some are the early spotters, flying highest, scanning the land with their laser-like vision. Others stay lower, waiting to see if the big guys have found something. And once they get confirmation, the lower-flying vultures race to the ground first, ready to shove their heads into the mess before anyone else gets a bite. This is where they differ wildly from their feathered counterparts, the golden eagles. While vultures are nature's silent funeral attendees, golden eagles are the sky's hired assassins, delivering death instead of simply attending its aftermath. If vultures were professional undertakers, eagles would be bounty hunters, tracking down prey, eliminating them with razor-sharp talons, and feasting on their victims without needing a middleman. Golden eagles, unlike vultures, don't wait for their food to die on its own. They prefer a more proactive approach, with wingspans stretching over 7 feet, a speed that could give sports cars an existential crisis, and the ability to dive at 200 miles per hour. These birds are the undisputed champions of airborne hunting. Their hunting methods are brutally efficient. They lock onto their target, dive with absolute precision, and slam into their prey like a living missile, using their enormous talons to crush bones on impact. But while eagles dominate the predatory side of the sky, vultures dominate the tactical scavenger side, proving that sometimes patience is the deadliest weapon of all. You might assume that vultures and eagles would be mortal enemies, considering that one waits for things to die, while the other actively makes things die. But their relationship is more complicated than that. In many cases, they coexist, tolerate, and even benefit from each other's work. Eagles, for all their power, don't finish every meal. Sometimes they abandon kills due to threats, lack of interest, or just because they're spoiled and only want the freshest portions. This is where vultures step in, waiting for eagles to do all the hard work before swooping in to clean up the leftovers. It's the ultimate sky-level teamwork, where the killers and the janitors maintain a delicate balance. However, the peace is not always mutual. When food is scarce, vultures and eagles can get into aerial duels over carcasses, a battle that can be described as WWE, but with wings and talons instead of chairs and ladders. Vultures, despite their intimidating presence, are not built for combat. Their beaks are hooked, perfect for tearing, but not strong enough for battle. Eagles, on the other hand, live for the fight. And if a vulture gets too cocky near an eagle's meal, it might find itself reconsidering its life choices very quickly. In extreme cases, eagles have been known to attack vultures mid-air, knocking them off balance, or even stealing food directly from their beaks. A process known as kleptoparasitism, which is a fancy word for "give me that, it's mine now." Despite the occasional eagle-related inconvenience, vultures always win in the end, simply because there are more of them, and they are more patient. While eagles burn through energy hunting, killing, and fighting for dominance, vultures play the long game, circling the skies, scanning for opportunity, and waiting for nature to do what nature does best, eventually kill something. They are the ultimate opportunists, the masters of finding without fighting, and they have perfected the art of letting everyone else do the hard work while they reap the benefits. And in a world where survival favors efficiency, it is the vulture, not the eagle, that ultimately gets the last laugh, or rather, the last meal. So the next time you see a vulture circling high above, don't assume it's just some lazy scavenger waiting for leftovers. It is an aerial strategist, a silent hunter without a kill, a watcher of death who plays the game of patience better than any creature on Earth. It is, quite simply, the ultimate master of the sky, without ever having to lift a claw in violence. And that, my friends, is what makes the vulture the most underappreciated aerial badass of all time. In the grand and somewhat unsettling world of scavengers, where animals squabble over rotten carcasses and leftovers like an unsupervised buffet, one bird stands apart in a league of its own. It does not chase, it does not kill, and unlike its feathered cousins, it has no interest in tearing apart flesh. Instead, it has chosen a far more disturbing culinary specialty. It eats bones. Meet the Lammergeier, also known as the bearded vulture, a bird so dramatic and metal that if it had a taste in music, it would exclusively listen to death metal while slow walking away from explosions. Unlike the bald-headed funeral home aesthetic of most vultures, the Lammergeier looks strangely majestic. With its fiery orange feathers, piercing red eyes, and the menacing black beard that runs down its beak, it appears more like an ancient warlord from a forgotten empire than a scavenger. But don't let its regal looks fool you. This bird is still very much a merciless recycler of the dead. Most scavengers, including traditional vultures, are perfectly content ripping into soft tissues, organs, and whatever meaty goodness is left on a corpse. Not the Lammergeier. No, this bird watches other vultures feasting, waits patiently, and then swoops in for the real prize, the bones. Now, if you're wondering how exactly a bird consumes bones, brace yourself. Because the Lammergeier has one of the most absurd yet brilliant feeding techniques in the entire animal kingdom. First, it snatches up a massive bone, sometimes longer than its own leg, flies thousands of feet into the air, and then drops it onto rocks below. With the precision of a trained assassin, it does this repeatedly until the bone shatters into convenient, bite-sized chunks, because even bone eaters like their meals prepped properly. Once the pieces are small enough, the Lammergeier swallows them whole, where its ridiculously powerful stomach acid dissolves them like a nuclear reactor melting through steel. And before you ask, yes, this means the Lammergeier's droppings are literally powdered bone dust, making it possibly the only bird that could accidentally start a haunted house just by existing. Unlike most vultures, which tend to go for the whole bald, deathly pale aesthetic, the Lammergeier is orange. Now, you might assume that this is just nature being artistic, but no, this bird dyes itself on purpose. Yes, you read that correctly. The bearded vulture is one of the only birds known to intentionally alter its own appearance. It bathes in iron-rich mud, covering itself in a burnt orange hue, which scientists believe intimidates rivals and makes it look even more terrifying. Imagine if humans did this. If corporate CEOs started rolling around in gold dust before meetings to assert dominance. That's basically what the Lammergeier is doing, and it works. Other scavengers don't dare mess with an orange bone-crushing giant that looks like it just walked out of a dragon's lair. Now, if the Lammergeier is the eerie, brooding warrior of the skies, then the marabou stork is its gangly horror movie cousin that nobody wants to be left alone with at night. Standing up to 5 feet tall with a wingspan stretching over 10 feet, the marabou stork is a towering corpse-picking nightmare. It looks like a Victorian ghost in bird form, with wispy tufts of hair, a rotting meat-scented beak, and a massive inflatable throat sac that resembles a misplaced organ from another creature. Unlike the Lammergeier, which operates at high altitudes, waiting for bone-dropping opportunities, the marabou stork prefers ground-level carnage. It has absolutely no shame in walking straight into a decaying pile of meat, shoving vultures out of the way and gulping down whatever it can get. While the Lammergeier is surgical, precise, and calculated, the marabou stork is more like a drunk diner at an all-you-can-eat buffet, stuffing itself to the point of barely being able to lift off the ground. Despite their differences, these two creatures share one key trait. They are both expert opportunists. The Lammergeier waits for bones to be exposed, while the marabou stork bulldozes its way into the mess. While one refines its diet to calcium-rich remains, the other eats literally anything that fits in its beak, including garbage, shoes, and even baby crocodiles. It's an unholy alliance of scavengers, with both birds playing their part in keeping nature's leftovers from piling up. Now you might be thinking, why on earth would a bird evolve to eat bones? What possible reason could nature have for this madness? The answer, as always, is ecological efficiency. Every animal has its niche, and the Lammergeier fills one of the most extreme and oddly useful ones. When other scavengers have torn through a carcass, leaving nothing but bones and disappointment, the Lammergeier swoops in like a cleanup crew with an insatiable calcium craving. By breaking down bones and digesting them, it prevents skeletal remains from piling up, ensuring that every last scrap of nutrients is returned to the earth. Without Lammergeiers, bone piles would accumulate, providing fewer recycling opportunities in the ecosystem, and possibly cluttering up mountains and valleys with the remains of past meals. Their ability to digest nearly 90% of a bone's composition makes them one of nature's most efficient recyclers, turning death into life in the most metal way possible. In a world full of scavengers, from hyenas gnawing on scraps to vultures tearing apart flesh, the Lammergeier remains an icon of patient, calculated efficiency. It doesn't fight for food. It doesn't battle over carcasses. It simply waits, watches, and lets gravity do the dirty work, proving that sometimes the best strategy isn't brute force. It's having the patience to let nature take its course. So the next time you hear about the most terrifying birds in the world, forget the eagles, the hawks, or even the flesh-eating vultures, because somewhere in the mountains, a silent, flame-colored assassin is dropping bones from the sky, cleaning up after the dead, and maintaining the natural order in the eeriest way possible. And if that isn't the most disturbingly cool thing you've ever heard, then I don't know what is. In the world of scavengers, where patience is a virtue and dinner is often an expired warranty on life, vultures have perfected the art of death detection. They don't chase, they don't kill, and they certainly don't waste energy in dramatic hunts like those overhyped predators with sharp teeth and bulging muscles. Instead, They are the forensic experts of the wild, sniffing out corpses before they've even finished the last stage of dying, arriving on scene before the Grim Reaper has signed off on the paperwork. Unlike most animals who spend their days desperately avoiding death, vultures actively seek it out. They are like freelance coroners, crime scene analysts, and garbage disposal workers all rolled into one, except they work for free, and instead of documenting the remains, they eat them. While other predators are locked in the constant struggle of hunting, chasing, and failing half the time because nature is cruel, vultures simply watch, wait, and swoop in when the job is already done. But how do these aerial detectives know where to find their next feast? How do they manage to locate death in an environment where carcasses disappear faster than a buffet during an all-you-can-eat lunch rush? The answer lies in a combination of supernatural-level vision, an insane sense of smell for some species, and the ability to read predator behavior like seasoned gamblers at a high-stakes poker game. Not all vultures are equipped with crime scene investigation nostrils, but some, like the turkey vulture, can sniff out a dead body from miles away. How? Because they can smell death gases. When a creature dies, it immediately starts the natural process of decay, releasing a cocktail of foul-smelling gases that would make even the most hardened stomach churn. These include cadaverine and putrescine, which, if you couldn't tell from the names, smell exactly like you'd imagine a rotting body would. While most animals wouldn't dream of following this scent, since you know it usually means danger, do not consume unless you enjoy food poisoning, vultures consider it the world's most enticing aroma. The turkey vulture's olfactory system is so advanced that it can detect these gases even when they are buried beneath a thick forest canopy, making it one of the few birds that can literally smell food underground. If there were a reality show about crime-solving birds, this guy would be the lead detective, solving cases before anyone else even knew a murder had happened. But while turkey vultures rely on their nosy detective work, others take a more visually dramatic approach to their dining habits. For many vulture species, including the mighty griffon vulture and the legendary Ruppel's vulture, vision is everything. And we're not talking about standard-issue birdsight here. These guys have eyesight so powerful that if humans had it, we'd be able to read text messages from across a football field and see individual ants crawling on a sidewalk from a mile away. Their ability to spot tiny details from extreme distances means that even the smallest movement of a dying animal, or the sight of another predator lurking around a fresh kill, becomes an instant invitation to dinner. This is where vultures take teamwork to another level. One vulture might be able to scan a wide area, but a group of them, that's an aerial surveillance system so efficient it makes spy satellites jealous. They spread out across vast distances, soaring effortlessly on thermal currents, scanning every inch of terrain for the slightest sign of an upcoming feast. The moment one of them sees something interesting, an injured animal struggling to walk, a predator finishing up a kill, or even just another vulture acting excited, the entire squad mobilizes like a synchronized unit of airborne gluttons. And that brings us to the most dramatic scavenger-predator showdown in the wild: vultures versus lions. Lions, the self-proclaimed kings of the savannah, are not exactly known for their patience. They spend most of their time lounging under trees, licking their massive paws, and occasionally swatting at flies with a level of laziness that would make house cats jealous. But when hunger strikes, they turn into ruthless, methodical hunters, stalking their prey, coordinating attacks, and taking down animals with terrifying efficiency. Vultures, of course, know this. They watch lions like nature's nosy neighbors, carefully observing their every move. When a pride of lions suddenly perks up, stretching, yawning, and moving with suspicious amounts of energy, vultures take mental notes. The moment the lions start stalking an antelope, the vultures begin their silent procession in the sky, following at a safe distance, like morbid sky paparazzi, waiting for the inevitable finale. If the lions succeed and bring down a zebra or wildebeest, the vultures remain patient, but not too patient. They watch from nearby trees, rooftops of the savannah, waiting for the big cats to get bored or distracted. Lions, after all, have short attention spans and are easily annoyed by heat, flies, and each other. After gorging themselves, they usually wander off to nap, leaving the perfect opportunity for vultures to descend en masse like a feathery riot squad. However, if the lions aren't finished eating, things get more interesting. Some particularly bold vultures start creeping in, hopping a little closer every few minutes. They wait for the lions to grow tired of their meal, or better yet, for a minor scuffle to break out between the pride members, because nothing distracts a lion like another lion stealing its food. If a territorial dispute erupts, vultures strike instantly, flapping their wings dramatically, dive-bombing onto the carcass and grabbing whatever chunks they can before the lions realize they've been outmaneuvered by a bunch of bald-headed scavengers. If the lions decide they've had enough of these disrespectful airborne freeloaders, they will charge, roaring furiously, sometimes even jumping at the birds. The vultures, perfectly aware of how much lions hate cardio, simply hop away lazily, flapping just enough to stay out of reach, waiting for the cats to burn through their energy reserves. The second the lions give up and flop back into the grass, panting and frustrated, the vultures resume their feast as if nothing happened. It is a hilarious yet highly effective strategy, proving once again that brains will always triumph over brawn. In the end, vultures aren't just scavengers, they are nature's best forensic analysts, aerial spies and master opportunists. Whether sniffing out gases of decay, scanning the horizon for the twitch of a dying animal, or tracking the movements of apex predators, they ensure that no carcass goes to waste. Without them, ecosystems would collapse under the weight of rotting corpses, and disease would spread unchecked. So the next time you see a vulture circling overhead, don't assume it's just waiting for something to die. It probably already knows exactly when, where, and how the feast will unfold. After all, it's not just a scavenger, it's the true king of death's waiting list. Throughout history, war has always been an all-you-can-eat buffet for the vultures. While human armies clash in glorious strategic battles filled with honor, valor, and catastrophic levels of questionable decision-making, vultures remain perched in the sky watching the spectacle unfold like seasoned war correspondents. They don't care about politics, borders, or who started the fight. Their only concern is the inevitable outcome, a sudden, glorious surplus of dead bodies. It doesn't matter if it's Napoleon marching through Europe, ancient Roman legions locking swords, or modern warfare turning battlefields into wastelands. Vultures have always been the ultimate victors. No matter how the war ends, one truth remains constant. Vultures will be there to clean up the mess. Picture a battlefield in the 19th century, somewhere in Europe. Napoleon's army, once proud and mighty, lies scattered across the frozen landscape. The battlefield is eerily silent, save for the faint rustling of wind through blood-soaked grass. And then, the real battle-hardened professionals arrive. Not cavalry, not reinforcements, but a squadron of vultures, descending with the solemn efficiency of airborne morticians. Historical records speak of battles where vultures circled for days, waiting patiently as exhausted, wounded soldiers finally succumbed to their fate. These birds were so efficient at predicting death that soldiers could gauge the severity of their wounds based on how closely the vultures were watching them. If a vulture was merely passing by, maybe things weren't so bad. If it landed a few feet away, things weren't looking great. If the vulture started sharpening its beak on a nearby rock, well, let's just say the medics might not have much work left to do. During the Napoleonic Wars, vultures became unofficial grim reapers, haunting the battlefields like ominous shadows. Soldiers wrote letters home, detailing how they saw vultures gathering before a battle even started, as if they had received a pre-battle memo from some unseen force of fate. It became a terrifying superstition. If the vultures started circling, it meant someone wasn't making it home. But the truth is, vultures don't predict death, they sense it unfolding in real time. Whether by smell, sight, or their impeccable ability to read the body language of the dying, they always know where to go next. This is how they evolved into nature's ultimate battlefield cleaners, ensuring that war-torn landscapes didn't turn into disease-ridden graveyards. While vultures seem like morbid opportunists, their role in the ecosystem is essential. When a battlefield is left littered with corpses, decomposition kicks in, and nature does not wait. Dead bodies quickly become breeding grounds for bacteria, parasites, and deadly diseases like anthrax, cholera, and the Black Plague. Without scavengers to dispose of the remains, entire regions could become biohazard nightmares, spreading infections far beyond the battlefield. This is where vultures shine. Unlike humans who require hazmat suits, disinfectants, and an entire WHO response team to handle a contaminated body, vultures dive headfirst into the disease-ridden feast without a second thought. Their stomach acid is so strong that it kills nearly every pathogen known to science, including anthrax, botulism, and rabies. What would kill a human within hours is processed, neutralized, and digested without so much as a hiccup. It's as if nature looked at the ever-growing problem of rotting, disease-ridden carcasses and said, "You know what we need? a bird with an indestructible digestive system and absolutely zero dietary standards. And thus, the vulture was custom designed for the job. Now, vultures aren't the only battlefield cleanup crew members. While they dominate the sky, there is another scavenger lurking below, waiting for its own share of the grim harvest: the jackal. Jackals are the land-based counterparts of vultures, and together they form a disturbingly efficient corpse management system. If vultures are the sky's funeral directors, jackals are the opportunistic street cleaners, darting between corpses, tearing off whatever flesh remains, and occasionally stealing from vultures when they get the chance. Their partnership is as chaotic as it is effective. Vultures arrive first, scanning the battlefield for the best remains. They rip apart the softest bits, tearing into open wounds, exposed organs, and anything that doesn't require too much effort. Meanwhile, jackals lurk at a distance, watching, waiting, and planning their next move. When the vultures have had their fill, jackals move in for the leftovers, using their razor-sharp teeth to gnaw off whatever scraps remain. They specialize in tendon stripping, marrow crunching, and even bone chewing, ensuring that absolutely nothing goes to waste. However, like all partnerships, this one comes with its fair share of betrayals. Jackals, despite their cunning nature, are not above cheating the system. When they're feeling particularly bold, they will dart forward, snatch meat straight from a vulture's beak, and sprint away before the birds can retaliate. Vultures, being dignified scavengers, prefer passive-aggressive retaliation. Instead of fighting back, they simply wait for the jackal to drop its guard, then steal back their meal. This petty game of theft and counter-theft goes on until the battlefield is stripped clean, leaving nothing but bones and dust behind. You might think that in today's high-tech warfare, vultures would have lost their relevance. After all, modern battlefields don't leave thousands of soldiers abandoned in the dirt, and we now have medical evacuations, body retrieval teams, and drone technology monitoring battle zones. But guess what? Vultures are still around, and they're still watching. In remote war zones where human cleanup efforts can't keep up, vultures still play their ancient role. Conflict-ridden areas from Syria to Sudan have seen vultures circling above fresh casualties, waiting, as they always have, for nature to run its course. Even in places with no official warfare, vultures track death from other sources, whether it be famine, poaching, or abandoned remains in lawless territories. Their role hasn't changed, but their image has. Today we see vultures as ecological warriors rather than just grim scavengers. Scientists even use their behavior to track poaching activities. If a sudden vulture gathering appears on satellite imagery, it might indicate a fresh, illegal kill. Conservationists have learned to read vultures like a map, following their movements to uncover hidden carcasses and expose environmental crimes. Vultures are not just scavengers, they are nature's most effective janitors. They have cleaned up battlefields, pandemics, and countless natural disasters, preventing the spread of disease and ensuring that death does not linger longer than necessary. And as for their longtime land-based allies, the jackals, they will continue to thrive alongside them, sneaking, stealing, and waiting for the next battlefield to offer another morbid, all-you-can-eat opportunity. So the next time you hear someone call a vulture ugly, disgusting, or unimportant, just remember, without them our world would be a much, much filthier place, and history's battlefields would still be littered with the forgotten remains of war. There are very few creatures in this world that can eat literal garbage, sanitize disease-ridden corpses, and prevent plagues, all while looking like they just crawled out of a gothic horror novel. Yet vultures, in their bald-headed, hunchbacked, unbothered glory, have been doing exactly that for millions of years. They are the cleanup crew of the animal kingdom, the ultimate waste management system, and nature's version of a hazmat team that never complains about overtime. They thrive where others perish, feast on what others fear, and keep ecosystems running smoothly, efficiently, and disease-free. Or at least they used to, because despite all their hard work, despite sacrificing their dignity by shoving their bald heads into decaying flesh, despite eating so many toxic pathogens that they could probably survive a zombie apocalypse, despite being one of the most important scavengers on the planet, vultures are dying. Fast. And if this trend continues, we might soon find out just how horrifically messy the world becomes when the janitors of death are no longer around. It's not every day you hear of a criminal mastermind waking up and saying, "You know what really needs to go? The vultures." Yet here we are. You see, vultures, in all their disgusting glory, have one major flaw: they are too good at their job. They don't just clean up carcasses, they expose death wherever it happens. And for some people, that is a big problem. Poachers, those delightful individuals who think killing endangered animals for profit is a fun hobby, have come to realize that vultures are their worst nightmare. When a poacher illegally kills a rhino or an elephant, they don't want anyone finding out. But vultures, nature's crime scene reporters, arrive almost instantly, circling above the carcass like a giant "look, something died here" sign in the sky. This is bad news for poachers, because it attracts rangers, conservationists, and authorities who follow the birds, find the body, and expose the crime. So what do the poachers do? They poison the carcasses. By lacing a dead animal with toxic chemicals, they can wipe out hundreds of vultures in a single sitting. It's a scorched earth strategy. Eliminate the birds and their crimes remain hidden longer. The result? Mass vulture die-offs, decimated populations, and a rapidly escalating ecological disaster. You might think, okay, so vultures die out. It's sad, but nature will find a way. Well, no, actually. Because vultures aren't just random birds that happen to eat dead things. They are a keystone species, meaning that without them, entire ecosystems begin to collapse in ways that are both terrifying and grotesque. Here's what happens when vultures aren't there to clean up the mess. Rotting carcasses start piling up. Without vultures, dead animals take much longer to decompose. And what happens when you leave a large, decaying body out in the open? You get an all-you-can-eat buffet for bacteria, flies, and disease-carrying scavengers. Disease spreads faster than ever. Vultures don't just eat dead things, they sterilize the dead. Their stomach acid is so powerful that it destroys anthrax, botulism, rabies, and even plague bacteria. Without them, these diseases don't just disappear, they spread. To humans, to livestock, to other wildlife. Other scavengers move in, but they're not as clean. Without vultures, rats, feral dogs, and jackals take over. Unlike vultures, these animals are not immune to the bacteria in rotting flesh, meaning they can become carriers of deadly diseases. The result? Rabies outbreaks, plagues, and massive health crises. Which brings us to one of the unlikeliest victims of vulture extinction, the tiger. Now, when you think of majestic, terrifying apex predators, vultures don't exactly come to mind. Tigers, on the other hand, are the undisputed royalty of the jungle, powerful, stealthy, and terrifying enough to make even the most fearless creatures think twice. So what exactly does a vulture's disappearance have to do with the fate of the tiger? Well, in India, where vulture populations have collapsed by over 97% in the last few decades, something horrifying has happened. Dead cattle are piling up, and the diseases that vultures used to eliminate are now infecting everything, including tigers. In the past, when a cow died in the wild, vultures would descend in minutes, strip the carcass down to clean bones, and be done with it before bacteria even had a chance to get comfortable. But without vultures, cattle corpses now rot for weeks, attracting feral dogs that feed on the remains. These dogs in turn spread rabies, a disease that has exploded in India since vultures began vanishing. And guess who else sometimes feeds on rotting remains when prey is scarce? That's right, tigers. Tigers are not natural scavengers, but in a landscape where carrion sits unattended for long periods, even a mighty apex predator can't resist an easy meal. And with that meal comes a cocktail of diseases, parasites, and infections that begin to weaken tiger populations. The more tigers interact with disease-carrying animals, the more their own health is compromised, making them more susceptible to infections and weaker overall as a species. This isn't just bad for tigers, it's bad for the entire ecosystem, because if tigers decline, their prey species, deer, boars, and smaller herbivores, start multiplying unchecked, throwing the entire food chain into chaotic disarray. Despite the horrifying consequences, there is hope. Conservationists have begun breeding programs, creating vulture safe zones, and pushing for strict bans on the toxic pesticides and poisons that have decimated populations. In some areas, governments are cracking down on poachers, increasing penalties for poisoning wildlife, and investing in education campaigns to teach communities about the importance of vultures. But the fight is far from over. Unless we act fast, the future could look very different. A world where carcasses linger, disease spreads unchecked, and apex predators like tigers face mounting health risks. A world where nature's most efficient cleanup crew is gone, leaving behind a rotting, festering mess that no species, not even humans, can ignore. And let's be honest, If the solution to preventing pandemics, rabies outbreaks, and ecosystem collapse is simply letting vultures do their job, isn't that a pretty easy fix? After all, in a world where everything that lives eventually dies, it's best to keep the professionals of death management around to handle the aftermath. When people think of rulers of the sky, their minds often drift toward the usual suspects: eagles, falcons, hawks, maybe even some overly aggressive seagulls that have perfected the art of sandwich theft. These birds are fast, sleek, and deadly, built for precision strikes and dramatic mid-air chases. But the true kings of the sky, the ones who actually control the high-altitude food economy, are the vultures. They may not be the flashiest birds. They don't have the soaring grace of a golden eagle, nor do they strike fear into hearts with razor-sharp talons. They aren't going to win any beauty contests either, unless you think a featherless, wrinkled, slightly decomposing face is a strong aesthetic choice. But looks can be deceiving, because when it comes to dominance, intelligence, and social hierarchy, vultures have mastered the skies in a way no other bird can rival. And what's even more interesting, not all vultures are equal. There is a strict pecking order, a brutal ranking system that determines who eats first, who gets the scraps, and who gets shoved aside like an unimportant intern at an office party. So, let's dive into the world of sky monarchs, food fights, and why size really does matter, especially when the contest is over a rotting, maggot-covered zebra carcass. Vultures are not lone wolves of the sky. They are social, strategic, and at times gloriously petty. Unlike raptors, which prefer to hunt alone, vultures work together, travel in groups, and rely on each other to locate food. However, once a carcass is found, it's every bird for itself. At a fresh kill, a very specific, very brutal order unfolds, one dictated by size, intimidation, and pure bullying tactics. The biggest, meanest vultures land first, eat first, and take the best pieces, while the smaller, less aggressive ones wait their turn or try to sneak in bites when the larger birds are too busy choking down intestine strands. At the very top of this avian caste system are the largest and most dominant vultures, the Andean condor and the California condor. These birds are so absurdly massive that if they were human, they'd be the kind of people who don't even need to flex to clear out space in an elevator. Now, if vultures are the high priests of the scavenger world, condors are the deities they all fear and respect. These birds are the largest flying scavengers in existence, and when they arrive at a carcass, everyone else steps aside. Let's start with the Andean condor, the undisputed heavyweight champion of all vultures. With a wingspan of up to 10 feet, longer than most cars, and weighing up to 30 pounds, this bird is essentially a floating dinosaur. It doesn't need speed or agility. It simply glides, watches, and descends upon food like an airborne tank. When it lands at a carcass, the smaller vultures, who have been squabbling for every scrap, immediately scatter like guilty children caught in the act. The Andean condor is slow, deliberate, and entirely unbothered by the chaos it causes. It doesn't fight, it just exists. And that's enough to make every other vulture rethink its life choices. Then there's its slightly more American cousin, the California condor. While not quite as heavy as the Andean condor, it still boasts a massive 9-foot wingspan, making it bigger than most toddlers stacked on top of each other in a trench coat. The California condor is less of a bully than the Andean, but it still follows the same rule of dominance. If it lands first, everyone else waits. These two condors rule the vulture kingdom with sheer size, and no other scavenger dares challenge them directly. However, dominance isn't just about muscle. There are other vultures that rise to power through intelligence, persistence, and good old-fashioned bullying. Just below the condors on the vulture hierarchy sit the larger but not quite monstrous vultures, like the lappet-faced vulture and the cinereous vulture. These birds are big enough to be respected, but not so big that they don't have to fight for their place. They use a mix of size, aggression, and tactical patience to secure their meals. The lappet-faced vulture, for example, is a master at intimidation tactics. While it isn't as large as a condor, it has one of the most powerful beaks in the vulture world, which it uses to rip open carcasses that other birds struggle to access. This makes it incredibly valuable to a vulture feeding frenzy. It does the hard work, then gets first dibs before the smaller vultures swarm in. Then there's the Ruppel's vulture, a bird that holds the record for the highest recorded flight of any bird, over 37,000 feet in the air. This vulture is basically a recon specialist, flying so absurdly high that it can spot dead animals long before other vultures even have a clue. While it doesn't have the brute force of a condor, It gets an early start on carcasses, giving it a strategic advantage. Finally, at the bottom of the food chain, we have the smaller, more desperate vultures, like the hooded vulture and the turkey vulture. These guys never get first pick, and they know it. Instead, they have perfected the art of waiting, sneaking, and grabbing whatever they can without getting pecked to death in the process. Turkey vultures, for example, are some of the best sniffers in the vulture world, meaning they often find food before anyone else. The problem? They're too small to claim it, so instead, they act as nature's unpaid food scouts, locating carcasses, starting the feast, and then getting promptly bullied out of their meal by larger vultures, who show up late but demand priority access. Hooded vultures, meanwhile, are basically the pickpockets of the scavenger world. They wait on the sidelines, pretending to be unimportant, and then dart in to steal scraps while the bigger vultures are too busy fighting each other. So, after all this feathery politics, who really rules the sky? While eagles and hawks get all the glory, the real power brokers are vultures. They dominate through patience, teamwork, and a brutal pecking order that ensures the strongest, biggest, and smartest birds always get their fill. And at the very top, the condors. Because in the end, no matter how many vultures squabble, sneak, or strategize, size always wins. And when a 10-foot wide flying dinosaur lands on your meal, you don't argue. You step aside, bow your bald little head, and wait your turn. Vultures have always had a terrible public relations team. No other bird has been so simultaneously revered and reviled, worshipped and vilified, depicted as a divine protector in one culture, while being cast as a grim omen in another. If vultures had access to the internet, they would probably spend their days scrolling through conspiracy forums, wondering why humans have spent thousands of years crafting legends that make them look like either angels of the afterlife or winged demons straight out of an apocalyptic nightmare. And yet, these birds are neither celestial beings nor sinister harbingers. They are just nature's sanitation workers who happen to get entangled in our deepest fears and superstitions. They do not cause death. They simply clean up the mess afterward. But for many societies throughout history, their presence alone was enough to send shivers down spines. In some places, they were seen as divine messengers, sacred creatures that bridged the gap between life and death. In others, they were omens of doom, cursed by their association with decay and suffering. It's a tale as old as time, humans misunderstanding an animal that plays a critical role in nature and turning it into a walking, or in this case, soaring, horror story. But vultures are not alone in this mythological mess. Another bird has suffered a similar fate, the owl, a creature that, depending on where you are in the world, is either a symbol of wisdom or a feathered agent of death lurking in the darkness with those unsettling, unblinking eyes. But let's start with the vultures, shall we? Because their reputation roller coaster is one of the most bizarre in the animal kingdom. Before vultures became the creepy background characters of Western horror films, they were royal, divine, and highly respected, at least in ancient Egypt, where these birds weren't just seen as Death Eaters, but as symbols of protection and motherhood. That's right. In a plot twist no one saw coming, vultures were associated with nurturing and care, their very image used to represent maternal devotion. This wasn't because the ancient Egyptians had a dark sense of humor, it was because they had actually observed vulture behavior. Unlike their cold, death-obsessed reputation today, vultures are, in fact, devoted parents. They fiercely protect their chicks, feed them through dedicated regurgitation, which admittedly doesn't sound very glamorous, and ensure their survival in some of the harshest environments on Earth. This maternal instinct was enough for the Egyptians to adopt the vulture as a royal symbol, particularly in the form of Nekhbet, the vulture goddess, who was seen as a guardian of pharaohs and the embodiment of divine protection. Egyptian queens even wore vulture-shaped crowns because nothing says, "I am a divine ruler," like having the image of a bald, bone-eating bird perched on your forehead. While the Egyptians saw vultures as noble protectors, the Tibetans saw them as something even greater, spiritual liberators. Tibet, with its rugged mountain landscapes and harsh climate, has never been the best place for traditional burials. The ground is too rocky to dig graves, and the limited availability of firewood makes cremation impractical. So Tibetan Buddhists developed an alternative that is both deeply spiritual and disturbingly practical: sky burials. A sky burial is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of placing the dead in the ground, their bodies are taken to high-altitude burial sites where vultures are allowed to consume the remains. This is not seen as gruesome or disrespectful, but rather as a sacred final act, a way for the body to be returned to nature. allowing the soul to be freed from earthly attachments. To Tibetan Buddhists, the body is merely a vessel. Once the soul has departed, what happens to the flesh is irrelevant. By feeding it to vultures, they believe they are performing an ultimate act of generosity, allowing the birds to sustain themselves while preventing the unnecessary decay of the body. It is a deeply poetic and strangely beautiful concept, but to the outside world, it has often been misunderstood and sensationalized, feeding into the already dark reputation that vultures have in many cultures. Fast forward to the modern era, and vultures have suffered what can only be described as the worst reputation decline since the invention of bad celebrity PR scandals. In many Western cultures, vultures have become symbols of death, decay, and bad omens. The moment they appear in a movie or TV show, you know something is about to go horribly wrong. Their presence suggests impending doom, and their habit of circling the dying and deceased makes them look like cosmic debt collectors waiting for your soul to vacate the premises. But this portrayal is comically unfair. Vultures are not waiting for you to die. They are simply checking their notifications for any nearby buffet opportunities. They do not curse the living, nor do they have some mystical ability to predict death. They just follow the rules of nature, using their keen eyesight and sense of smell to find what has already perished. The irony is that another bird, the owl, has suffered an eerily similar fate, but with its own unique brand of spooky prestige. While vultures dominate the realm of the dead by day, owls take the night shift. Like vultures, owls have been both worshipped and feared throughout history. In many cultures, they are seen as wise and mystical, symbols of knowledge and guidance. In others, they are cursed omens, shadowy creatures that bring misfortune. In ancient Greece, owls were sacred to Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and were seen as symbols of intelligence. Meanwhile, in parts of India and Africa, they have been viewed as messengers of death, their eerie calls believed to foretell tragedy and disaster. The problem is that owls are nocturnal, silent, and have unsettlingly large eyes, which means that for much of human history, they have been misinterpreted as supernatural creatures rather than just birds that really enjoy eating rodents in the dark. And so much like vultures, owls have found themselves trapped in human superstition, misunderstood and unfairly cast as something far darker than they truly are. Vultures have gone from sacred symbols of protection to creepy horror movie extras, but their true nature remains unchanged. They are not omens of death, nor are they waiting to snatch away souls. They are nature's recyclers, playing an essential role in the ecosystem, ensuring that the world does not become overrun with disease and decay. Much like owls, their image has been twisted by human imagination, turned into something ominous and foreboding. But the truth is, without them, the world would be a much filthier, deadlier place. So the next time you see a vulture perched ominously on a tree, staring at you with those beady, judgmental eyes, don't assume it's there to deliver bad news. It's just doing its job, keeping the world cleaner, healthier, and strangely more sacred than we ever gave it credit for. Vultures are the grim reapers of the animal kingdom, always circling, always waiting, always looking like they just crawled out of a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And yet, despite their ghoulish reputation, these birds are not the villains of nature, but its silent, underappreciated heroes. They don't kill, they don't terrorize, they don't cackle like hyenas or leave trails of destruction like rampaging elephants. Instead, they simply wait for the inevitable and then get to work doing what no other creature wants to do, cleaning up the dead before disease turns the world into a festering nightmare. But what happens when the cleanup crew goes extinct? What if, one day, the skies were empty of vultures and their watchful presence over the land simply vanished? What if, instead of efficiently devouring the dead, carcasses were left to rot under the sun, breeding swarms of bacteria, parasites, and disease-carrying insects? The answer is simple: chaos, filth, and plague. And yet, that's exactly the scenario we're headed toward. Vultures are dying faster than anyone expected, and the consequences of their disappearance are far more terrifying than any horror movie about flesh-eating zombies. If vultures suddenly vanish tomorrow, the first thing we'd notice is the smell. That pungent, rotting, disease-ridden stench that would hang thick in the air, curling into every open field and forest like an unwanted guest. Without vultures to rapidly dispose of dead animals, corpses would linger for weeks, giving bacteria and parasites the VIP access they've always wanted. This is not an exaggeration. In areas where vulture populations have plummeted, like India, where vulture numbers have dropped by over 97% due to poisoning, Rotting carcasses now sit undisturbed for days. As a result, feral dogs and rats have taken over, feasting on the remains while also spreading rabies, tuberculosis, and anthrax. These scavengers aren't equipped with stomachs strong enough to destroy pathogens like vultures can, which means instead of preventing diseases, they become carriers, spreading infections at an alarming rate. And humans? Well, they don't get off scot-free either. Studies have shown that in regions where vultures are in decline, human death rates from disease outbreaks have increased. It turns out that when nature's morticians aren't around to do their jobs, people start getting sick a whole lot faster. So, how did we end up in a situation where one of nature's most important species is teetering on the edge of extinction? You'd think that a bird whose entire diet consists of rotting meat and bones would be tough enough to survive anything. Unfortunately, that is not the case. There are three major reasons why vulture populations have plummeted worldwide. Poisoning, the silent massacre. In many regions, particularly in Africa and Asia, poachers poison animal carcasses to kill vultures. Why? Because vultures, being the nosy, crime-reporting birds they are, gather in huge numbers over fresh kills, alerting park rangers and law enforcement to illegal poaching sites. Poachers, rather than dealing with the inconvenience of vultures blowing their cover, simply lace carcasses with deadly pesticides, wiping out entire flocks in a single meal. The numbers are staggering. In some cases, hundreds of vultures have been found dead around a single poisoned carcass, their bodies piled up like a scene from a macabre nature documentary. The worst part? These poisonings are intentional, and yet they often go unpunished. Habitat loss and human interference. Like most wildlife, vultures have suffered from deforestation, urban expansion, and human encroachment into their natural territories. Nesting sites are being destroyed, food sources are dwindling, and electrocution from power lines is now a major cause of vulture deaths. And let's be honest, nobody is dedicating conservation funds to saving ugly birds when pandas and tigers exist. Veterinary drugs that kill more than just cows. One of the greatest vulture killers of all time is a seemingly innocent livestock drug called diclofenac. Farmers use it to treat cattle, but when these cows die and vultures feed on their remains, the drug causes kidney failure, killing vultures en masse. This single medication has been directly responsible for the catastrophic collapse of vulture populations in South Asia, leading to the chain reaction of disease outbreaks that followed. Despite the gloom and doom, there is hope, but it requires action, awareness, and maybe a little bit of the same comeback energy that wolves had. Yes, wolves, one of the most hated, hunted, and misunderstood predators in history, were once on the brink of extinction too. Centuries of hunting, extermination campaigns, and habitat destruction nearly wiped them off the map. But through conservation efforts, reintroductions, and somewhat begrudging human intervention, wolves have started to make a comeback, proving that even species once considered pests can reclaim their place in the ecosystem. So can vultures do the same? Absolutely. Here's how. Banning deadly poisons and veterinary drugs. Several countries have already started banning diclofenac and other harmful substances, but it needs to happen on a global scale. Conservationists are pushing for vulture-safe alternatives to be used in veterinary medicine. And while progress is slow, it's a step in the right direction. Protecting nesting sites and creating safe zones. Some organizations have started establishing vulture breeding programs and protected zones, ensuring that these birds can raise their chicks without the threat of habitat destruction or poisoning. Programs like these have already helped the California condor make a slow but steady comeback, proving that vulture conservation isn't just wishful thinking, it actually works. Public awareness and changing the narrative. The biggest hurdle to saving vultures is public perception. People don't rally behind bald-headed, bone-eating birds the way they do for pandas or elephants. But if more people understood just how important vultures are, perhaps attitudes would shift. Conservationists are working to educate the public, rewrite the narrative, and turn vultures from horror movie extras into the ecological superheroes they truly are. It's not too late. Vultures aren't gone yet, but they need help. We've already seen how the loss of these birds can create catastrophic ripple effects, and we now have a choice. Do we let them fade into extinction, or do we fight for their survival? Nature is already giving us warning signs: plague outbreaks, rabies explosions, and unchecked decay in vultureless regions. The evidence is clear: we need these birds. If wolves, once the most hunted and hated animals in the world, can make a comeback, why not vultures? With the right conservation efforts, they too can rise from the brink, restoring their rightful place as the janitors, recyclers, and ultimate kings of the sky. Because in the grand design of nature, there is no throne more important than keeping the world clean, disease-free, and functioning as it should. And if that means letting bald-headed birds continue their sacred, messy work, then maybe, just maybe, it's time we start treating vultures like the life-saving legends they truly are. Like what you saw? Don't let the story end here. Subscribe now for more jaw-dropping wildlife documentaries and uncover nature's deadliest secrets. Missed one? Watch our other epic documentaries because the wild never stops.